Hello again. We get into the first passage here in the book of Acts this morning with the first 12 verses. And something I want to encourage you to do as we get into this reading, and you're reading this text on your own every day, is a question you might ask yourself as you're reading this text to help you get into sort of a very experience near reading of the text. And that would be to ask yourself the question, what is the good news in this text? This particular 12 verses that you're reading today, or whatever verses you're reading into the coming days. And one thing I want to note here that may become good news to us in the midst of our current circumstances of physical distancing and quarantining and things of that nature is the role that that place plays in this particular text, and the tensions that exist in the text between place and time. So I want to note here in verse 4, Jesus is speaking to the disciples when he appears to them again, and he says to them not to leave Jerusalem, but to wait there for the Spirit. And then, just a couple of verses later, the disciples say, Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom? So hear the tension there between Jesus' focus on place, on having them stay in Jerusalem, and the disciples' focus on time. Is this the time? Willie Jennings, in his theological commentary, says, geography matters. Place matters to God. From a specific place, the disciples will move forward into the world. The Spirit will be given to them in that place, and from that place, they will be changed. But the disciples want to know about time, the temporal versus the spatial. We might see this coming up in other places in the book of Acts too, so I'll encourage you to continue to look for this tension between the temporal and the spatial in the book of Acts. And I do wonder how we can relate to this in some ways right now. With a lot of focus on place and where we are placing our bodies and where we are not placing our bodies. Most of us living in the context of some sort of isolation and quarantine in order to stop the rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. And our own tensions between place and time. When is the time when we can get back together and have church as we are used to having church? But this text might lead us to ask a different question about our current situation. For example, what is it about the place that we are in right now that might speak to us something about the Spirit's movement? What can we notice about the importance and significance of our physicality and our location in our homes that might indicate something to us about how the Spirit is working? And I want to encourage you to think about this in terms of your past really profound spiritual experiences, because the kinds of questions we ask to interrogate those experiences and learn from them might be challenged by this text as well. For example, we might normally ask a question about, what was happening in my life at that time that made that spiritual experience, that experience of nearness to God, that experience of the Spirit's palpability to me. What was happening in my life at that time that made that possible? But we might ask a different kind of question led by the book of Acts here. Where was I when that happened? What was it about the specificity of the place where I was located, where my body was in that moment, that invited something of a divine experience or a spiritual experience? So think about the ways you relate to this for these first 12 verses in the book of Acts. And then I want to point out one thing that I found really interesting in this text, and that was around verse 8 here. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. A very place-focused verse, isn't it? In Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. But there's a little language play there that I think could be interesting to think about in relation to the spatial and the temporal. The word there for the ends of the earth is the word eschatos, or eschato, which is where we get the term eschatology, the ways of thinking about the end times. So we could think about this as Jesus sort of playing with the disciples' obsession with time when he was so focused on place. You will be my witnesses in Judea, in this place, in Samaria, in this place, and to the ends of the earth, which has a very spatial resonance to it, but in the language could also connote something rather apocalyptic and eschatological. You'll be my witnesses to the end of space-time. Interesting ways of reading the text. I hope you're enjoying it so far.